Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 49 of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. This is the first podcast episode of a series of episodes featuring listeners of the Everyday Buddhism podcast. This first episode features podcast listener David Farley. If you listened to episode 46 with Greg Creech, I mentioned David and read just a little bit of his article about uncertainty. And so I thought an interview with how David coped and is coping with the pandemic would be a good way to start this new series of podcasts featuring podcast listeners. So keep your emails coming. Let me know how you've coped and how you are coping. Have you been and are you using any mindfulness meditation or other spiritual or Buddhist practices to help get through these times? Keep those emails coming. You'll get a sense of what we might talk about if we feature you on one of our next episodes in this series when you hear me talking to David Farley today. David Farley is a New York-based writer with a focus on food, travel, and Buddhism. He's also a certified meditation teacher. His writing regularly appears in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, National Geographic, and the BBC, among other publications. Farley is the author of two books. One, Underground Worlds, A Guide to Spectacular Subterranean Places, and two, An Irreverent Curiosity, In Search of the Church's Strangest Relic in Italy's Oddest Town, which was made into a documentary by the National Geographic Channel. So I will post links to David's website and articles in the show notes. I think you will very much enjoy our conversation. David's insights about how he dealt with uncertainty prior to the pandemic and how he talks about it as if it's like dancing, and how he felt well prepared for coping with the pandemic due to his previous practice and understanding of dancing with uncertainty, despite being a food and travel writer living in the initial ground zero of the pandemic in the U.S., New York City. So, without any more discussion on my part, let's get on with the conversation with David. So, as the months of the pandemic drone on and on and on, continuing with its uncertainty, finding places of peace has become an all-important focus of life, for me anyway, and I got to figure it's for you too. So, as I shared with you at the end of the last short episode about building a resilience bank, I thought it might be helpful to reach out to podcast listeners and ask them to share some of their own personal coping, support, and resilience building practices or activities they have incorporated in their lives that have helped them then walk through the troubled times we're living in. Hopefully these are Buddhist related if possible, or at least spiritually related if possible, but it could just be daily activities that you think are very helpful. Like connecting with nature in a certain way in which you do that, or a different kind of exercise that you incorporate in your life. That's okay too. Whatever, I guess it's whatever gets you through the night and day. So you guys connect with me, and I'll invite some of you to be guests on an upcoming episode. I will again share how to connect at the end of this episode and also post details in the show notes. So this is the very first episode featuring an Everyday Buddhism podcast listener, David Farley, who I talked a little bit about in my intro, and who actually I talked about in a couple of episodes prior to this with Greg Creech, as when we shared a bit of his article called "The Relief and Uncertainty Now." Muses One New Yorker, which was published in Newsweek. So if you didn't catch that article, there's a link to it in that podcast recording with Greg Creech. I think it's episode 46. I could be wrong. And I will also share other links in the show notes to this too. But anyway, after David shared that original article with me, we sort of got talking on email, and he shared another article with me that was sort of the inspiration to do this and to ask other podcast listeners to say what's going on with them. In this article, it was called "Is It About the Journey or the Destination?" And it's on his Trip Out website. That's a website, right, David?
Yes.
Okay. So in a recent article he shared with me, he asked that question: what is most important, the journey or the destination? No, this is not a Zen koan, although it could in fact be a Zen koan. So we will play with that a little bit. But as a travel writer, David is a travel and food writer. And as a travel writer, I think journey is a comfortable metaphor for David to use. And it's also a good one for us to launch this conversation on our seeming missing future given to us by the pandemic. And actually now we've got a lot of add-on traumas here. But so with that brief or not so brief lead in, I want to welcome David Farley to the podcast. Hi, David. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks. It's really an honor to be here as someone who's listened to the podcast from episode 1.
Wow. That was quite a while. That was a couple years, I think. Yeah. Did you find it at episode 1 or did you happen on it later on?
I think I found it at episode 1. I didn't realize that podcasts were on Spotify, which I'm a subscriber to. And I just one day had this light bulb moment where I thought, hey, I could listen to like Buddhist podcasts on Spotify. And so I just typed in Buddhism and I found about a bunch of them and then sampled some and saved some and didn't save others, the ones I liked. And yours was one of the ones that I liked. And I think you had just done one episode.
That's amazing. You got right into it. That's great. I love hearing these stories. That's good. And I think you also are a subscriber to my colleague and friend Noah Rachetta's podcast, Secular Buddhism.
Yes, he was one of the 5 or so Buddhist podcasts that I saved, and then I listen to still to this day every episode.
Which that's pretty cool. There's 5 of them, and 2 of the ones are Bright Dawn alumni. I think that's amazing. So there we are. Before we deep dive into the questions of whether it's the journey or the destination that is most important, could you talk a little more about your personal involvement with Buddhism, how you discovered it, how you found it, and then up to, in fact, what your current practices are?
I can't actually pinpoint the moment when I first felt kind of exhilarated, if you will, by Buddhism, or tickled by it. But somehow I only remember feeling that somehow this all made much more sense to me than anything I'd ever heard before. And so I think I was living in San Francisco, going to graduate school in history, and I somehow stumbled upon a Tibetan Buddhist center that's still there, I think, called Seichin Ling. Mm-hmm. And so I started going to regular, like 1 hour long meditation sessions there, going to lectures all the time. Whenever the Venerable Robina Korchen came to town, I was always in the front row because she's really entertaining and enlightening as well. And so I started meditating at home regularly. I had an altar. I was really into it. A few years later, I moved to New York City, where I live now, and I thought, for me to do this, like, I can't do it on my own, because if I meditate regularly on my own, I'll talk myself out of it or something. Yep. So I need to go to a place that forces me to do it, and I never really found that place. But fast forward a few years, and I got back into Buddhism, and I'd say over the last 15 years, I've kind of gone in and out. But it's been the last few years now that I've really dedicated myself to it. I was meditating at a place in my neighborhood. I live in Greenwich Village. There was a place here called Mindful, MNDFL.
Mm-hmm.
You know it's cool because it doesn't have any vowels. Um, but yeah, so I found that it's like a meditation studio, and so I became a paying subscriber or member, like going to a gym, and I would just go there and meditate every day. And I found that because of the peer pressure of having to meditate with a group, and also having to pay for it, it forced me to not only go every day, but sit there the whole time, like for the 30 or 45-minute session. And so that was
Right.
great. Now, unfortunately, Mindful is closed because of the pandemic. I mean, I think they like went out of business. And so now I've been regularly meditating at home. And it's great. And I also went on to get a certificate in teaching meditation from the Nolanda Institute here in New York. So I'm a qualified meditation teacher, although since I finished the program last year, I've mostly just been teaching family and friends.
Yeah, but that's great. And how's that working out? I mean, did they respond in a positive way? Did it make a difference for them?
Yeah, it's it's kind of interesting because everyone always has the same complaints and questions about it. Like they say, "Oh, I tried it for 5 minutes and it just doesn't feel like it's working for me." And I say, "Well, the fact that you tried it means you were actually meditating because there's this misconception, which you know about too, that when people see people meditating, they think they must be all blissed out and on
Yeah.
some kind of natural high or something. And that's not the case. Even lifelong meditators, even maybe the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh, they're even sometimes struggling with thoughts in their head too.
Yeah, and actually the point is never to get rid of the thoughts. The point is to watch the thoughts come and go and just not get involved or as uh um um now I can't remember who said it. Suzuki Roshi, yeah. Suzuki Roshi said, I think it was Suzuki Roshi. I'll double check, but I think it was said, leave your front and back doors open, and watch your thoughts come through. Just don't invite them for tea.
Yeah,
And I always like that
that's exactly
because,
it.
yeah, that's it. And, I think when people learn that it's much more about just watching not just thoughts but like sensations, um and all sensory input, which is essentially consciousness, just watching, just being there, observing consciousness in sort of a wide, non-engaged way, if that's possible. People, and it is possible because people that I teach, and I'm sure you've had this experience, are shocked that that's what it's all about and that they can actually do that, right?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
and yeah, they sure you jump on that train of thought and you follow it down, and all of a sudden you realize all you're doing is thinking again. But the minute that you realize that you're thinking, well, then there you go, you're meditating again. And so it's I'm sure you've had that rewarding experience where they said, wow, I didn't know it was like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there are also like other random things that happen to you when you meditate a lot, which is like um, sometimes I'll have like a really profound moment of clarity. Sometimes I'm struggling with a dilemma about what to do about something and I don't know. And then when I'm meditating, a thought will come in through the back door, and before it leaves the front door, um, it's like hit me over the head. Like, oh, it's so obvious now. I know what to do. And I think that's also because when you're meditating, there isn't a lot of other stimulation for your five senses. And so like if I'm thinking and I'm walking on the street in New York City, I'm hearing things, I'm smelling things, I'm seeing things, and it's kind of clouding my brain and my decision making. But if I'm meditating, there's nothing else going on except for me, you know, you know, uh, being conscious of the thoughts that are in my head. And so sometimes a thought will come through related to something that I'm really like, I have a dilemma on, and I'll just be like, oh my God, yes, this is the direction I should go in. So I found that really helpful.
That's I'm sure people are aware that there's like different kinds of meditation, and two of the most common are shamatha or clear abiding, you just sit there and try to be peaceful. And then there's the Vipassana, which is more about being aware of sensation, sensory input, and that sort of thing. But it's Vipassana is really called insight meditation, and it's exactly as you described. It's where you can actually get insights, you know, be
Yeah.
and I don't I've always wondered why they call that, how that worked out to be that shamatha is just clear abiding and vipassana is insight, because I'm wondering if you can get insight when you're just sitting there and clear abiding. But that's, I think that's an everyday Buddhism question. It shows that I don't really know what I'm talking about sometimes. But the funny thing is about that is like there's so many things that can happen in meditation, but I think too many people expect that things will happen, but generally things don't happen. You're just observing things as they are, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, pop culture has presented meditation in a kind of unrealistic way with some kind of like sadhu or holy man meditating on the top of a mountain, and he looks like, completely blissed out, and people expect that, oh, I guess I'm not that holy man or holy woman, so I guess it's not working for me.
Yep. Yep. And that's true. And that's why, that's why I so love what's happened over the years where, part of me has hates this and part of me likes this, like the sort of mindfulness culture, you know what I mean? Where mindfulness is taught as a way to, that taught in corporations as a way to make their employees more productive, and it's just everywhere, and it seems like anybody's teaching it, and part of me doesn't like it because I think it tends to I don't know, downplay where mindfulness and meditation came from, which is rich, the rich teachings and practices of Buddhism that go beyond just meditation. But the other part of me loves it because it's open to everybody, right? And the
Yeah, that's
more it's
true.
open to everybody, I think the more that sort of that stupid thought, that, or like you said, the cultural icon of the holy man in pure bliss as being what meditation is goes away. And I think it's going to go away faster now in the pandemic because, wow, almost all Buddhist meditation centers, Buddhist liturgies, everything are online now. I mean, any day you can catch about 2 or 3 different traditions, right?
Yeah, it's true.
So the pandemic has helped that. So we went on and on, but I knew we would, because when we talked before, I could tell that's how it was going to go. But we got to get back to that question. So is it the journey or the destination?
Right. I mean, I pose that because I'm a travel writer, and so I'm always on a journey
Yeah.
frequently, pre-pandemic anyway. And it's something that like literally like people who like to travel like talk about. But this was sort of a trick question because it's neither the journey nor the destination actually. This was partly inspired by a talk I heard the philosopher Alan Watts give, and you can look it up on YouTube. I think it's under the title "Life is Not a Journey." And
Mm-hmm.
we like to use this phrase "life is a journey" because it's kind of, the word journey is sort of drenched in wisdom, and it implies some sort of travel, and everyone loves to travel mostly. But as Alan Watts said, like, it's neither, that this implies that there's a beginning and an end, but
Right.
really, like, and also it's imbued with all kinds of elements of time. And really, as Alan Watts said, it's more like a song. Should be seen more like a song and a dance. Like maybe we've been looking at the time span of our lives completely wrongly. And if we see it more as a song or a dance, then it sort of gives us the freedom, the agency, the personal agency to stop and kind of smell the flowers, because if life is a journey and then there's a destination, what's the destination? It's death. And
Yeah.
Maybe it's a healthier way to look at life, to just think of it as a song or a dance, because it's all, we don't really listen to music for the end of it. We don't really
Right.
do a dance for the end of the dance. The dance is the point of it itself. And if it was about the end, then as Alan Watts says, composers would only write the finale of a song, or they'd write really fast songs so they could get to the end. But that's not the point. It's for engrossing yourself in the song and in the dance in the moment. And that's the key phrase, is living in the moment. And so that's what you're doing when you're in a dance. You're really living in the present moment.
Yeah, I think I said something like this too, and I don't in a recent podcast, and I'll share that with you later. Actually, it wasn't in a podcast; it was in an article that I was quoted in for Glassdoor, and I'll share that with you later about dance. And this was before I even got your article about dance, and that I said living in pandemic time, which is what I keep hearing about, pandemic time, because people are really so lost, and it's sort of like time is what keeps them centered, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like I got to do this at 2:00. I got to take the kids here at 4:00. I got a meeting at 7:30, and so that makes life sort of like you're aware that you're actually kind of living life. And in pandemic time, even if we're working and we have projects and deadlines and stuff, or even if you're homeschooling, or now even as some things open up, you're actually going to work or going to school. Pandemic time has, I think, shifted our reality so much, that it's crazy, really. And the crazy shifting is sort of like dancing, really, like you said. And it reminds me of what Mark Epstein, he wrote this book called Advice Not Given: A Guide to Getting Over Yourself. And he said, if we can be open, we find that life's unpredictability is full of interesting and invigorating challenges. These challenges engage us in unexpected and unanticipated ways, and allow for the freedom of unscripted responsiveness. Right action,
Mm-hmm.
he said, is more than just a reaction. It springs from an attunement to the moment that the confines of convention obscure. Now, I like that because it really opens up right action, part of the Eightfold Path, to something beyond an edict or rules. I love the phrase unscripted responsiveness, because that's really like dancing, isn't it? And it's also like travel, which, by the way, David, I'll share with you, I hate to travel.
Okay. Come
I know you.
on.
No, hate it. Always have.
Well, I
Um,
mean, what type? I mean, I hate the act of going from point A to point B, but I
right.
love being in a foreign destination. So, I also don't like travel, like getting on a plane and eating the gruel that they feed you, and the person in front of you leaning way back in their seat. I hate that. I despise that. But it's all about the destination. When I travel, I like being in the destination.
Yeah, it's true. And it's like, I guess, I'm not as flexible as some. And so it's sort of like that unscripted responsiveness. Maybe I'm not a great dancer to unscripted responsiveness. Travel, and being in a destination that I don't know is all about being able to be responsive to something I can't anticipate. It's unscripted.
Yeah.
And I guess it's sort of scary for me. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
um,
But that's kind of what has inspired me to write some of these articles that you were talking about earlier, like the relief of uncertainty for Newsweek, and then the journey or the destination for my own website, tripout.online, is they were kind of inspired by the pandemic and the fact that we were all kind of stuck here. And, we, the pandemic has kind of unveiled this reality that, the reality that we've been living all along, but we're kind of hiding from,
yeah,
is that
exactly.
the future is kind of an illusion, and certainty is also an illusion. We've been living with uncertainty all along, but in March and April, everyone was really freaking out because of uncertainty, because you couldn't imagine your life a year from now like we could before. And that
Right.
gives us some kind of comfort. And I thought, if there's anything we can take from this terrible time, it's that maybe we can get used to living in uncertainty a bit. And I think that's, in a perverse way, I think that's really good for us.
It is a great lesson, and I actually posed that question to Greg Creech on my episode with him a couple episodes ago about uncertainty, and I asked him the question at the end. I think I said, how do you think we're going to do? Are we going to, when we get at the other side of this pandemic, which I don't really know what that means really, or what that looks like, but when we get to the other side of it, are we all going to be like better Buddhists, and are even non-Buddhists going to really understand the fact that certainty and the future were both illusory, or are we just going to kick about like we always did? I think he didn't have an answer for that. Do you?
Nope. I'm not even going to touch that one.
Okay.
I mean, because instead, that would contradict everything I'm writing about, Wendy. Thinking about the future.
Exactly.
I'm advocating that we use this time to try to stay in the present more, to try to focus on living right in the moment and not thinking much about the future or the past, because those really are just illusions. The past is gone, the future doesn't exist yet. So what do you have left? The present moment. And it brings up this phrase that I heard your pal Noah Rasheta mention in a podcast, radical okayness. I think he has a whole episode dedicated to that in a secular Buddhism podcast. And it's really kind of a radical idea, like hence the name radical okayness. But it doesn't mean like being numb to big changes or to loss or anything. It's simply like taking everything in stride and being mindful to it. It's and just accepting the ups and downs with a kind of okayness. It's a very sort of un-American way of thinking in some ways, because we're so focused on the future and everything. It reminds me of when I was in university in Santa Cruz, California. I had this professor who was talking about the way Buddhist monks make mandalas, and they spend days, weeks, months creating this beautiful thing. And then he said, and then at the end, when they're finished with it, they might look at it and admire it for a second, and then they just destroy it. And he asked the class, why do you think they destroy it? And one student raised his hand. He said, to perfect it, to do it again and perfect it. And the professor said, that's really the most American way of looking at that. So it's quite interesting. So that sort of reminds me of, that's sort of a good metaphor for radical okayness of just, just trying to exist and be okay with what comes at you.
Yeah, it that wraps around, sort of the whole Buddhist foundation, the Buddhist foundation of philosophy, right? Which is, which are the three marks of existence. Really, I put that as the Buddhist foundation of the Buddhist philosophical foundation. I mean, there are the Four Noble Truths and there are the Eightfold Path, but they're more about how to live. But underneath all that is the reality that we see when we have right view, which is the first of the Eightfold Path. And to me, it's the key. If we have right view, then right action and right speech and so forth come along in an easier way, because we're able to have this right view. And the right view consists of the three marks of existence, which are impermanence, which is this is exactly what we're talking about. And the pandemic is like the sort of like the whack on the back of our heads to open us up to really living with the three marks of existence. And that is impermanence, or anicca, or
anicca.
Anicca, yeah. And
I have it tattooed on my arm.
You do? You have an anicca tag?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Isn't that funny? Okay. We have to get to that story in a minute. And unsatisfactoriness, or dukkha, or suffering. And
I also have that tattooed on my arm.
And then therefore you have anatta on your arm, no self?
No, that's probably going to be next though.
It better be. So, and one of my personal favorite mantras is that the good thing about this impermanence, which is one of the three marks, is just relax, because this too will change. In some ways, we tend to want everything to stay the same, right? Pre-pandemic, we wanted everything to stay the same. Change was upsetting, which is probably why I was talking about why I don't like to travel. It's too much change. And especially when things are good, we don't want anything to change. But with the pandemic, social unrest, and the inevitable evidence of climate change we're now living through, it's taught us that things do change. And right now, things aren't very good. Actually, they're pretty awful. But the good thing is that things are impermanent, right? This too will change. Now, that is not looking to the future necessarily. It's just accepting the fact that this is just a moment in time, and it will go out the back door as well.
Yes, exactly. It's like a river, so Buddhism is so fascinating because all these concepts are so interlinked, like anicca and impermanence is so goes right into the other Buddhist concept of no self and emptiness. You can't have
Right.
the concept of emptiness and no self without impermanence and without suffering or dukkha. So it's fascinating to me. It's like they're all working with each other, and it's really, I love it actually.
Yes, it's brilliant. It's like I always say to myself when I was, excuse me, first learning Buddhism, it's like, who thought of this? Who thought of this? Right? I guess it was the Buddha. We don't know, right? We honestly don't know. I mean, we see it in his original sutras and from the Pali and where he taught these things. But just like in Christianity, this stuff was written after the fact.
Yeah, exactly. So
we
don't know, but it doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't really matter at all. So this also, excuse me. We got to move to this unscripted responsiveness. Excuse me, and back to the metaphor of dancing. Since you used the metaphor of dancing in your article, and again talking today, then I think it's very fair of me to ask how you are dancing. How are you personally incorporating the dance of the pandemic, the unscripted responsiveness in your life?
I'm dancing on unemployment checks. I've just been reading a lot more Buddhist philosophy, and I should be out in the world traveling and eating and so on, because that's what I do for a living. But yeah, I'm just hanging around my apartment in my neighborhood and reading a lot, drinking a lot of coffee, and that's really about it. But this idea of the dance kind of appealed to me because by accident, I feel like when I look back at my life, I feel like I've sort of always been dancing, or as an adult anyway, because I just decided that when I was in college that I didn't want to live this life. Not there's anything wrong with this type of life, but I thought about my own father who, lived this very sort of typical structured American life in the suburbs. He got married young, had kids, worked in an office all his life. He couldn't wait to retire. I just found some old letters from him. And it was from the mid 90s. And in every letter, he kept going on and on about how he couldn't wait to retire. He had one more year left or 2 more years, and he couldn't wait. And then, as like back to the Alan Watts thing, Alan Watts suggests, by the time you finally meet this goal of you retire and you have free time, you have time to dance, you might not be like in the best condition for dancing. So right. I decided when I was in college that I was going to try to live a life. I didn't know what it was, but I was going to try to live life on my own terms as much as possible. And that meant kind of not having a life like my dad did. So I eventually kind of figured it out, what I wanted to do, which was being a food and travel writer. And it kind of has allowed me to live life on my own terms because I don't have a boss. I can live anywhere I want in the world. And, I can kind of do anything I want. I can go out to lunch on a Tuesday and have a couple drinks with a friend and not have to worry about going back to the office or whatever. So, I find for me personally, like the dance is living life on your own terms.
Yeah. And so there's an undercurrent and that I'm hearing in your narrative about your life, that it's almost like, hey, the pandemic didn't shake me at all because I've always sort of lived with this change.
It did, yeah, that's true. And a few years before, like I went through a really rough time. Like my father died. I had the unexpected end of a long romantic relationship that just kind of came out of nowhere. And I think in a weird way that sort of prepared me, because like, if you would have asked me, a year before all that happened, what's the most certain thing in your life? I'd say, oh, I'm going to marry this woman, and she's going to be with me the rest of my life. And then suddenly one day she wasn't. And so I think this kind of idea of certainty and rather living a life, being aware of the fact that life is completely uncertain, and really etching that into my soul really helped prepare me for the pandemic. When the lockdown happened, people were really kind of panicking, and I was,
Right.
I was nervous, and I was being safe and everything, but I also was just sort of a little bit more relaxed for some reason. And it even surprised me.
Yes, and especially, we need to point out that you live in New York City.
Yeah, exactly. Where it was really bad in March and April.
Yeah, it was like ground zero the ground zero was that little place in California where the long-term care facility or whatever, but where it really hit was New York City. And so to live in that was beyond uncertainty. That was like terror for most people. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it was startling. Like when I would walk to the supermarket once a week, I have to walk by a hospital, and out in front of the hospital suddenly appeared these refrigerated trucks for storing dead bodies, because they didn't have enough room in the hospital. And so I would see that, once or twice a week, and it would just be this jolt of like, whoa.
And so that, that itself is a Buddhist practice. That we talk about the sitting, meditating on the charnel grounds. You've heard of that in Tibetan Buddhist
Yes.
practice. And
Mm-hmm.
and where the charnel grounds were actually in ledges of mountains in Tibet and Nepal, and they would throw the dead bodies there, and they would carrying birds, hawks, vultures, whatever they have in Tibet, would come down and scrape the bones clean. And this is really depressing, but 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 it was taught that to sit there and meditate, or in other words, to watch what happens to our bodies, what is the eventual end of us, is a way of finding equanimity, which is a key. Is a key goal. If I try not to use the word goal in Buddhism ever, but
Yes, exactly.
it's a thing that we know
It's a direction.
it's a direction to aim at, right? And we know maybe our practice has produced some fruit if we feel more equanimity in situations where we wouldn't have before. And so what I'm hearing from you is that you sort of were almost prepared for this because you did not freak out, even walking past those refrigerated trucks.
Yeah, exactly. And also, like I've never really been averse to death. I used to volunteer at a hospice when I was in my 20s in Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
and I would my job was a friendly visitor to the dying.
Wow.
Because when I was in high school, a friend died in a car accident, and I saw that like family friends of the girl who died, they couldn't handle grief. They couldn't handle seeing the family grieve, and they kind of disappeared because they
Yeah.
just couldn't handle it. And I was like, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing to me. So I started volunteering as a friendly visitor to the dying at a hospice, and they often would say to me, I'm so glad you're here, because all my family and friends, like, they don't visit me as much as they used to, because they're not really prepared with grief, as most of us in the West are not. And then, I just found that so fascinating. And then later on in life, I went to Varanasi and wrote an article about how I spent 2 weeks on the banks of the Ganges River at the cremation ghats,
Yes.
hanging out with the guys whose low caste condemns them to as their occupation to burn bodies,
Right. Right.
So I spent 2 weeks just watching bodies burn.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
And I'm linking that article to our show notes too. That's the one you sent me, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And see, I'm learning so much because everybody has such uh, a different experience with what's happening. It's like that one of the um, recent podcasts I've done, it was, we may all be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And we all have so many different reactions to this experience. And I've been amazed when I can not react and can just watch as sort of like a sociologist or something,
Hmm.
watch all the different reactions to the pandemic. I mean, just watching the divisiveness and so forth about the maskers and the anti-maskers and the deniers and the this and the that, but also how people respond in their day-to-day life. Some people try to pretend everything's the same. Some people, they put on their mask, they do all the safe things, but they keep going to the store the same amount of time. They keep doing everything the same. And then there are other people, have been, pretty much sheltered in place, either through fear or through knowing that they are at a higher risk group or whatever, and that their whole lives have been turned upside down. And I talk to people like that, and some of their reflections are very different. Some of them are bitter, and some of them are like, well, this has been unbelievably peaceful. So it's like it's almost like I've heard this whole pandemic experience be referred to as mass trauma, which indeed I think it is, but I also think it's a mass meditation, right?
Hmm. It can
where,
be.
where we're being forced to look at things. Now, not everybody's doing that. I granted, but we are being forced to look at things, whether or not people are going to do it or not. But your story is amazing, and I'm glad we were able to share that.
No,
One of
thanks. I
the
mean, it
things,
doesn't make me a better person because I was calmer during it. Like a spider could crawl up on my leg right now and I would freak out. Well, most people would just flick it off, or a bear. I'm totally afraid of bears because they're marauding, godless killing machines. Um, and while another person would just be like, "Oh, it's just a bear. Calm down." So, I just happened through because I think I had these experiences in the past, and maybe meditation and maybe Buddhist philosophy sort of helped me prepare for this one moment.
yeah, I mean, who exactly? I mean, who knows? Like everyone always says, it's everybody. This is what people have a misconception about karma. Karma is really just the action resulting from different causes and conditions, or the result of different causes and conditions. Some of which you bring on yourself, some of which just happen to you. And if one thing I always do to try to be non-judgmental about other people and their reactions, and especially during this pandemic time when I get mad at non-maskers, anti-maskers, and so forth, is you have you have to look at their lives and say, they had XYZ experience in their lives. They were born as a little baby, and then this happened to them, this happened to them, this happened to them. And if all of those things happened to me exactly the same way, I would be them, right? I
Hmm.
would be them. And that's karma. Everybody's karma is different, and we're going to react to situations differently. But I think that's one of the reasons why I want to have other people on this podcast, because I think it's very helpful to hear other people's experience of this rather than just mine, because we're all here doing this stuff. It does remind me of what Stephen Batchelor, he wrote in the Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist that
Hmm.
he said, I'm going to quote part of it, but part of it I'm not sure of. But I remember a lot of this because I have talked about this before. But he talked about living on this shifting ground, okay, and which is essentially where we are. But like you said, we were ignorant, or we denied that our ground was shifting. We thought everything was the same all the time, right? Everything was sure. But he talks about how, if to live in this way, we need to stop obsessing about what has happened before and what might happen later. And that's about sort of this eternal now, this sort of this lack of time, or pandemic time, or lack of future that we're living in. And what that means is we have to be extremely more conscious of what is happening now. And that doesn't mean we deny our past. Like, you don't deny those things that happened to you, your death of your father, the failing relationship. We don't deny that we may have a future here, but it's really about being in a different relationship, with the impermanence and of life, instead of,
Exactly.
being obsessed with the past. So I wished everything could be the same way, or speculating about how's this going to end? If you ever, scroll through Reddit someday, or what's the other one? What's the name of that one with the Q?
QAnon?
Yeah. No, not QAnon. No, not QAnon.
No, it's cute 4chan.
No, not QAnon and 4chan. It's a forum. I forget now, but everybody will know. And I don't mean QAnon, because we don't want to go there. But
No, we don't.
But Quora.
Oh, right.
Yeah, where people ask questions about things and other people answer, who consider themselves experts, although most of the time I don't think they are. But if you scroll through either one of those, like, open public forums like Quora or Reddit, and you keep the same question keeps getting asked them. How's this pandemic going to end? When's this pandemic going to end? People want somebody to speculate about it and tell them, and then they'll feel better about it, right? That's sort of like that speculation of the future that Stephen Batchelor talked about. And when you do either of those things, like, oh, I wish it could be like that, or I wonder how it's going to be, then we're not at all seeing the fruit of what is now, which is the germ of what will be. That's what I remember about his quote. The fruit of what has been is the now, and that's the germ of what will be. And we need to see that in our now. And it's just like you said, about there's this sort of weird sort of thought that Buddhists are these peaceful meditators and they're all blissed out. And but the Buddha didn't encourage withdrawal, like into a timeless mystical now, which is sort of like spiritual bypassing, but more like a in your face, kind of unflinching encounter with whatever the contingent world is happening moment to moment.
Yeah, exactly. There's I just put on like my Instagram a few weeks ago a quote by Jack Kornfield, where he says something very similar to that Stephen Batchelor quote, where he says, like, we're planting. This is a fitting quote from someone named Jack Kornfield, because he talks about planting seeds. And he says, we might plant a seed now, we might not even be around to see the result of it, but we're always like planting these seeds in this ground. And and Pema Chodron too talks a lot about groundlessness and the importance of realizing and being comfortable with shifting ground. And it's always a revelation to me when I come across stuff like that and stop and really think about it.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to share about, unfortunately, I have to say, David, you weren't talking about what you were doing to make yourself feel better, because you were feeling okay all along.
Right. Yeah. I've had my moments of being down a little bit, but I would have felt that way without the pandemic anyway, probably. So
yeah, so you've sort of been my dud first guest. No offense.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, you know what I'm saying. I was looking for like somebody's magic bullet, how they overcame like the angst of the pandemic, but you had very little angst, and that's just exciting to me that there are people out there who are like that. That's great.
Right, but I really took, as they say, took refuge in the Dharma
Awesome.
even more so when the pandemic happened too. Like I really leaned into it. I was already quite invested, but I leaned into it even more. So, because I wanted to, I didn't want to freak out.
Yeah, so like you were like stubborn about it. I'm not going to freak out.
No, I didn't even say that. I was just like, just calm and, just be calm and don't think about the future too much because that's ridiculous. Like even, even today on the news, they said that, the entire world might not actually get vaccinated from coronavirus until 2024 if there's like a double injection virus.
Right.
And so it's like, if you start projecting when this is going to be over and life's going to get back to quote normal again, you'll just drive yourself crazy because then you'll see the news and they're saying, oh, maybe that'll happen then. No, it'll be a bit longer. It'll be a bit longer.
Yeah,
And you're setting yourself up for a disappointment. It's kind of
exactly.
like what you mentioned earlier, how you don't like to use the word goal. If you have a goal, you're possibly setting yourself up for a disappointment. Instead, if you have a direction, then you're just moving in that direction at the pace that you want to go. And there's not necessarily like a finish line for you to either finish or not finish, be disappointed or be happy about.
So that sort of circles us back to the beginning. You just answered the question. Then it's the journey then.
I guess, but as long as you dance on the way.
Yeah, okay. I was going to share a little bit of information that I mentioned that I would share this later. Someone that reached out to me. She's a writer for Glassdoor. Her name is Eileen Honigman Meyer, and she's reached out to me a few times for just sort of a different type of quote that would help somebody. And since Glassdoor is much more of a career and employment sort of publication, it's usually about stuff like that, but she takes a softer side of things, and she's reached out to me before. So she was preparing to write this article called Reclaiming Your Balance as the Kids Head Back to School, and she reached out to me about some of the ways in which you could possibly reclaim your balance. And I was going to share a little bit about what I wrote because I think it's very helpful, since it's been helpful for me to look at things this way. So I wrote, we live in confusing times. Don't expect clarity. There is nothing about these times that can be figured out. Absolutely, which is sort of referring to you about like when the pandemic's going to end, when are we going to get a vaccine? So back to my quote, our individual worlds are dancing with the uncertainty of the whole world to the pandemic's beat. We can't hear the beat, and we can't anticipate the next move. No step you take, no decision you make is sure to be the right one because the foundation of everything is uncertain. So it's good to remember that any action you take is the right one because you took action.
Yeah, you wrote that?
Yes, I wrote
Oh,
that.
excellent. That's great.
I wrote that. He's Mr. Surprise. So yeah, I wrote that because, that's what helps me. I was guilty of the same thing. I think a lot of people, that doom scrolling behavior we all did in March, April, and May.
Mm-hmm.
Looking for the next tweet, the next this, the next that was going to answer all our questions. And sooner or later, we all had to realize, or I think most of us had to realize, that was not helpful in any way at all. And there was something that clicked in me that when knowing that there was no clarity, this was utter confusion, and that, okay, you can relax in that too, right? You can just
Yeah.
relax in utter confusion, because sometimes it's like holding hope and despair in both hands, one hope in one hand, despair in the other. You can wake up in the morning and be absolutely terrified, like, of all of this stuff, and then you can take a walk and listen to the birds, and just that, and then you realize, right this minute, I'm happy. I'm peaceful.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right?
it's just, I think it's for a lot of people, it's hard to get used to the idea of not having as much self-control in your life as you did, because there are these larger forces, in this case the pandemic, that are in control of the world right now. And I think that's, for a lot of people, for most of us, that's really difficult. Do you know that there's this Rumi poem? There's this great, Rumi comes up all the time. It's for a Sufi mystic, especially in Buddhism.
Yeah,
It's
I
kind of
love
funny, but
Rumi.
he has this great short poem where he says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down on the grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. And I love the idea of this field that he imagines, because it's like the radical absence of control and confronting our terror of uncertainty. We give names to things. We create boxes and brackets and categories because we're just
Concepts.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
and concepts, and we're just so afraid of the terror of uncertainty and emptiness. And I think that's what Rumi's kind of speaking about there.
It is, and I absolutely love that poem, and I'm a huge Rumi fan. So yes, again, we have synchronicity. But I think that's it. And that does circle us back around to the three marks of existence, and maintaining right view. Emptiness has such a negative sound because it sounds like everything is empty. But as that everything isn't empty, everything is full of possibility. It's only our concepts that put things in a box, right? If we have a
Yes,
concept of what something is, then that's all it can be, right? This even applies to relationships and everything. If we have a concept that someone is this way, and then when they act outside of the way we think that was, then we didn't allow them to be something else, right? um, uh,
exactly.
well, my Dharma grandfather, that's my teacher, Reverend Koyo Kabose, and the founder of Bright Dawn Oneness Buddhism. His father, Reverend Gyome Kabose, who founded the first Buddhist temple in the Midwest in the 40s, the Chicago Buddhist Temple. Soon after he was released from imprisonment in the Great Japanese Internment, he moved to Chicago from being in the camps, and he founded the Chicago Buddhist Temple, and he wrote a few books. And one of my favorite lines that he had is, "We tend to put a period on everything." And that just means we tend to want to put everything in a box, conceptualize it, and say, this is it. But then he goes on to say, but everything is one thing, but every day it's one thing after another. Period.
Mm.
That, you see, no period. Every day is one thing after another. So
Hmm.
I think that's helpful if in having that. So David, is there anything else that I missed that you would like me to ask you about, or?
No, I don't think so. I think it was great. It was really good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, David, as the very first guest on how you're handling the pandemic. I had so much fun talking to you about it, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks again.
Thanks. It was a great pleasure.
Thanks again to David Farley for joining me for this podcast. I feel so lucky to meet all these fascinating people as a host of this podcast. And it includes you, the listener. And don't forget, I'm looking for input from Everyday Buddhism podcast listeners. I've received a few emails, but would love to hear from more of you about how you are coping. Where have you found support? What are some of your resilience building practices or activities that you've incorporated in your lives that have helped you walk through these troubled times? Please email your insights or comments to Wendy Shinyo at everyday-buddhism.com. That's WENDYSHINYO, all strung together lowercase. Wendy Shinyo at everyday-buddhism.com. Buddhism.com with the subject line, How I'm Coping. I will reach out to schedule a time to talk with you, then possibly schedule a podcast interview with you and a few other listeners, sometimes in group, sometimes solo. So I look forward to hearing from you. So that's it for this episode. And as a reminder, don't forget that there are many ways to join me and others in either the private donation-supported Everyday Sangha that meets every other week virtually on Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time through Zoom, or our free public open Sangha, which will now be held every month virtually on Wednesday evenings at 7:30 p.m. on Zoom, through Zoom, with Levi Shinyo Sensei. And until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.